The January wind cut through downtown Phoenix like broken glass, sharp and unforgiving. Marcus Webb pulled his Army-issue jacket tighter around his shoulders, though the fabric had worn so thin after 8 years that it offered little more than the memory of warmth. He was 42 years old, but the cracked mirror in the Valley Veterans Shelter bathroom showed him someone much older, gray threading through the beard he kept trimmed with dollar store scissors, lines carved deep around eyes that had seen too much, hands that trembled slightly when he thought no one was looking. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. Those hands had once steadied a rifle scope in the mountains of Afghanistan, calculating windage and distance with the precision that kept his squad alive. Now they struggled to hold a styrofoam cup of shelter coffee without shaking. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. He'd survived ambushes, firefights, and an IED blast that left shrapnel in his left leg and nightmares in his head. But he couldn't survive coming home. The shelter doors wouldn't open for another 3 hours. Marcus sat on his usual bench outside the public library, the metal cold even through his jeans, his backpack pressed against his leg like a faithful dog. Everything he owned lived in that pack. 2 changes of clothes rolled military tight, a water bottle with a cracked lid, his discharge papers sealed in a Ziploc bag, a photograph of his daughter Sophia from when she was 7 before the divorce, before the medication stopped working, before the bills buried him alive, and a small wooden box containing his Purple Heart and Bronze Star. Medals don't pay rent. They don't silence the nightmares. They don't explain to a 5-year-old why Daddy can't stop shaking during fireworks. Marcus watched the morning commuters rush past, everyone moving with purpose toward destinations, toward lives that made sense. Coffee in hand, phones pressed to ears, keys jangling in pockets that led to homes waiting warm and patient. He'd had that once. A townhouse in Tempe with a small backyard where Sophia learned to ride her bike, wobbling and laughing while he ran beside her. A wife named Catherine who had the most beautiful laugh, like wind chimes on a summer porch. A job as a security consultant that used his military experience without breaking him further. But PTSD doesn't knock politely. It kicks down doors at 3 in the morning with the sound of explosions that aren't really there. It turns fireworks into firefights, backfiring cars into ambushes, crowded spaces into kill zones. The medications helped for a while, Zoloft, then Paxil, then something else with a name he couldn't pronounce. But when the insurance ran out, so did the pills. And when the pills stopped, the nightmares came back with interest. First came the panic attacks at work, sweating and hyperventilating in the bathroom stall, while his heart tried to hammer through his ribs. Then the missed shifts, when he couldn't force himself out of bed. Then the termination letter, professionally worded but clear. "We're sorry, but we need someone reliable." Then the medical debt from the emergency room visits they kept stacking up like sandbags against a flood. Then the missed mortgage payments. Then Catherine's ultimatums, delivered with tears streaming down her face. "Get help or get out. I can't watch you disappear anymore." He'd tried. God knows he'd tried. But the VA waitlist was 6 months long, and the cheap therapist who took walk-ins told him to try deep breathing and positive visualization. As if breathing deeply would stop his hands from shaking. As if visualizing success would make the nightmares stop showing him Parker's face, blown apart by an IED on a dirt road outside Kandahar. The divorce papers came on a Tuesday, delivered by a process server who couldn't look him in the eye. The eviction notice arrived on a Friday, taped to the door next to Sophia's crayon drawing of their family stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. By the following Monday, Marcus was learning which downtown benches didn't have armrests designed to prevent people from sleeping, which gas stations would let you use the bathroom without buying anything, which soup kitchens served on which days. That was 3 years ago. 1,000 days of learning how to be invisible, how to survive on the edges of a society that had thanked him for his service, and then looked away. 3 years of the shelter routine. Wake at 6, pack your belongings, clear out by 7. Spend the day looking for work. Any work day, labor at construction sites, cleaning gutters, washing dishes, anything that paid cash and didn't ask too many questions. Return by 5 to get a bed for the night. Mandatory breathalyzer at the door. Mandatory group therapy on Thursdays, where men twice broken sat in circles and pretended that talking about their feelings would fix what had shattered inside them. The shelter staff were kind. Marcus appreciated that. Betty, the intake coordinator, always had an encouraging word. Ron, the night manager, was a Vietnam vet himself and understood what it meant when Marcus couldn't sleep and paced the halls at midnight. But kindness doesn't change the fundamental reality. The shelter was a holding pattern, a place to keep people from dying on the street, but not a place where lives got rebuilt. Marcus had been saving money, though. Every dollar he could squeeze from odd jobs went into a coffee can he kept locked in his assigned storage cubby. $1,163, accumulated 1-day labor gig at a time, carefully hoarded against some unnamed future emergency. He didn't have a plan for the money exactly, just a stubborn refusal to be completely without resources. Maybe it was the soldier in him, always maintain a reserve, always have an exit strategy. On this particular January morning, Marcus had woken before dawn from the usual nightmare. The convoy, the explosion, Parker screaming his name. Marcus had given up trying to go back to sleep after these episodes. Instead, he'd walked to the library through streets still dark and cold, his breath fogging the air, his boots held together with duct tape and hope leaving prints in frost-touched sidewalk. The library was his sanctuary. It opened at 8, and Marcus was always first in line. Warm in winter, cool in summer, and nobody hassled veterans who kept to themselves and didn't cause trouble. He had his spot at the back table near the biographies, where he could sit with his back to the wall and see everyone who came and went. Old habits from patrol duty: never sit with your back exposed. Always maintain situational awareness. This morning, waiting for the doors to open, Marcus studied the people around him. A young mother pushing a stroller, the baby bundled against the cold. An elderly man walking his dog, the animal wearing a tiny sweater. A businessman in an expensive coat, talking loudly into his phone about quarterly projections. Normal people living normal lives in a normal world that Marcus had somehow fallen out of. He wasn't bitter about it, not exactly. Bitterness required energy he didn't have. He was just tired, bone deep, soul tired in a way that sleep never fixed. Tired of being cold, of being hungry, of being afraid. Tired of the looks people gave him, that careful neutrality that meant they'd registered him as homeless and were already calculating the fastest way to walk past without making eye contact. Tired of feeling like a ghost, present but unseen, existing in the spaces between other people's lives. The library doors finally opened. Marcus filed in with the handful of other early arrivals, mostly older folks seeking free internet, students getting homework done before school. The librarian at the front desk, a young woman named Jenna, nodded at him. "Morning, Marcus." "Morning, ma'am." He'd been coming here long enough that they knew him by name. That counted for something. Being known, being seen, being treated like a person instead of a problem. Marcus made his way to his usual table, dropping his backpack into the chair while he checked the bathroom. Clean yourself up as best you can, because dignity matters even when you're living rough. The mirror showed him what it always showed. A face that had aged a decade in 3 years. Eyes that had seen too much. A body that was slowly breaking down from inadequate food, poor sleep, and the constant stress of survival. But he was clean-shaven. His hair trimmed short, in a military cut he maintained himself. His clothes worn but not dirty. He'd learned early that how you presented yourself mattered. Look too rough, and stores wouldn't let you in. Look too broken, and people crossed the street to avoid you. So Marcus maintained what he could: cleanliness, basic grooming, the outer shell of dignity, even when everything inside felt shattered. Back at his table, he pulled out a notebook where he tracked job leads, appointments, the daily logistics of homelessness. Today's list: check in at the temp labor office at 10. Stop by the community center about their job training program. Call the VA about his benefits claim, still pending after 14 months. Maybe hit the food bank, if there was time. But then something caught his eye. Near the reference desk, there was a community bulletin board covered in notices. Lost cat, guitar lessons, estate sale, resume writing services. Marcus usually ignored it. Most of the notices weren't relevant to someone in his situation. But today, one flyer stood out. It was printed on cheap yellow paper, the ink slightly smeared. Pushed to the corner like an afterthought. Auction. Abandoned property. Lakeside Bell Tower. Minimum bid, $1,000. As is. Where is? Saturday, February 4th. Marcus stood and moved closer. The flyer included a grainy black and white photograph of a stone tower rising from dark water, maybe 40 feet tall, its top crowned with what looked like a bell housing. The image was poor quality, but something about it grabbed his attention. The tower looked solid despite obvious abandonment, its stonework thick and substantial. Below the photo, sparse details. Property located at Saguaro Lake, approximately 40 miles northeast of Phoenix. Historic bell tower from defunct resort property. Partially submerged. Structurally questionable. Sold for demolition or salvage value. No utilities. No road access. Buyer responsible for all removal and disposal costs. Marcus read it 3 times. $1,000 minimum bid. He had $1,163 to his name. This was insane. What would a homeless veteran do with an abandoned bell tower half sunk in a lake? He had nowhere to live now. No job. No prospects. Buying a condemned structure in the middle of nowhere made zero logical sense. But something about it called to him. Maybe it was the tower's solitude alone in the water. Forgotten by the world, but still standing. Maybe it was the soldier's instinct that said, high ground is defensible ground, and a tower was the ultimate high ground. Maybe it was just desperation, the drowning man's grab at anything that floats. Or maybe it was simpler than that. The tower was abandoned, unwanted, left to rot. Marcus understood what that felt like. He carefully removed the flyer from the board, folded it, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. The auction was in 3 days. He had time to think about it, time to talk himself out of this crazy idea, but he already knew he wouldn't. That night at the shelter, Marcus lay in his bunk, third tier, middle row, the springs squeaking every time the guy below him rolled over and stared at the ceiling. Around him, 50 other men snored, coughed, muttered in their sleep. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and industrial cleaning products. Someone was crying softly 3 bunks over, trying to muffle the sound in his pillow. Marcus knew better than to check on him. Some breakdowns needed to happen in private, even in a room full of people. He pulled out the auction flyer and studied it in the dim emergency lighting. What was he thinking? Even if he bought it, what then? He couldn't live there, no power, no water, no heat. It was literally sinking into a lake. It was probably filled with black mold and structural damage. He'd be throwing away every dollar he'd saved on something worthless. But worthless to whom? Maybe it was worthless to people who had houses, jobs, futures. But to someone who had nothing, wasn't even something broken better than nothing at all? Marcus had learned something in Afghanistan that had stayed with him. Sometimes, the worst positions become the best positions if you're creative enough. A valley that looks like a kill zone can become your defensive advantage if you own the high ground. A building that looks indefensible can become a fortress if you understand its angles. His squad had survived because they'd learned to see potential where others saw problems. Maybe the tower was like that. Maybe everyone else saw a condemned building that would cost a fortune to demolish. But Marcus saw something else. He saw 4 walls and a roof. He saw shelter. He saw property, actual property that could be owned, that couldn't evict you or kick you out when the shelter reached capacity. He saw a place to exist without needing permission. Was it crazy? Absolutely. Was it risky? Completely. But what did he have to lose? If he didn't buy it, he'd still be homeless, still be sleeping in shelters, still be scraping by. The money would run out eventually anyway. Medical emergency, stolen backpack, any of 1,000 small disasters that regularly destroyed the fragile stability of street life. At least this way, he'd have tried something. He'd have bet on himself, on the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he could build something from ruins. The next morning, Marcus walked to the county assessor's office and requested property records for the bell tower. The clerk looked at him skeptically. His worn clothes and shelter-worn appearance didn't exactly scream prospective property buyer, but she pulled the records anyway. Marcus spent 2 hours reviewing everything, making notes. The tower was part of a larger resort property called Celestial Resort, built in 1926 and abandoned in the early 1930s. The entire complex had been condemned and partially demolished in the 60s. But the bell tower had been left standing due to its location in the lake. Over the years, various entities had owned the property: banks, investment companies, the county itself, during a tax default period. Now it was being auctioned by the current owner, a development company that had acquired it as part of a larger land deal and wanted to unload the problematic piece. No one had lived there in 90 years. No one had maintained it in probably 60. But the county structural engineer's report from 5 years ago, the most recent assessment, noted that the foundation appeared sound despite partial submersion, and the stonework showed remarkable durability given age and exposure. It also noted the tower was dangerous and should not be entered without proper safety equipment. Marcus smiled at that. He'd entered buildings in Afghanistan that were actively being shelled. He could handle a tower with questionable floors. Saturday morning arrived cold and gray. Marcus cleaned up as best he could at the shelter, put on his least worn clothes, and counted out $1,200 in cash. The $1,163 he'd saved, plus $47, He'd earned the day before doing yard work. He tucked the money deep in his front pocket, along with his ID and the property information he'd gathered. The auction was held in a cramped office that smelled like old coffee and forgotten dreams. Marcus arrived early and sat in a plastic chair near the back, watching other people file in. Most left within minutes after reviewing the property condition report. A couple of developers stayed longer, discussing demolition costs and salvage value in voices that made it clear they saw the tower as a problem to solve, not an opportunity to seize. The auctioneer was a tired-looking woman named Patricia, who seemed ready for this whole thing to be over. Lot 47, she announced. Historic bell tower, Saguaro Lake. Abandoned structure. Partial submersion. Sold as is. Where is? Buyer assumes all liability, removal, and disposal costs. Minimum bid, $1,000. Silence. The developers consulted their phones, probably running calculations. One shook his head and stood to leave. The other followed. Within 5 minutes, Marcus was the only person left in the room. Patricia looked at him with barely concealed surprise. "Sir, did you want to bid?" Marcus stood. His voice came out steady, carrying the authority of someone who'd once commanded men in combat, even if his clothes were held together with hope and duct tape. $1,200. Patricia blinked. "You're bidding $1,200? "Yes, ma'am." She glanced around the empty room. "Anyone else?" Silence. She sighed. "Sold. I'll need certified funds or cash by close of business Monday." "I have cash now, ma'am." Her eyebrows rose. Marcus pulled out the envelope of crumpled bills. 20s, 10s, 5s, 1s, and counted out $1,200 on her desk. Patricia stared at the money for a moment, then at Marcus, really looking at him for the first time. "Sir, have you actually seen this property? It's not habitable. There's no power, no water, and half of it is underwater. I've reviewed all available documentation, ma'am. This isn't a house. You can't live there, I understand." She studied him carefully, taking in the worn military jacket with its faded patches, the weathered face, the quiet dignity of someone who'd seen harder things than a condemned building. "You're a veteran." "Yes, ma'am." "Army." "Served in Afghanistan." Something in her expression softened. "My father served in Vietnam. She trailed off. "Look, I need you to understand what you're buying. This is essentially a condemned structure. You're going to have liability issues, access issues, probably environmental issues. It would cost hundreds of thousands to properly demolish and clear. I'm not planning to demolish it." "Then, what are you planning?" Marcus met her eyes. "To see if something everyone thinks is worthless might still have value." Patricia held his gaze for a long moment. Then she counted the money, filed the paperwork, and handed him a deed and a single rusted key. "I hope you're right," she said quietly. "God knows somebody should be." Marcus called Tommy, another vet from the shelter who had a truck, and offered him $50 to drive out to the lake. They left that afternoon, following directions that led northeast out of the city, the landscape gradually shifting from urban sprawl to desert scrubland to the rocky hills surrounding Saguaro Lake. "You seriously bought a tower in a lake?" Tommy asked for the third time. "Seemed like a good idea. Man, for $1,200, you could have bought a decent car, or paid first and last month's rent somewhere. Cars break down. Landlords evict people. Property is property. Property that's underwater, only partially." The road ended about a mile from the coordinates. They parked and hiked the rest of the way, boots crunching on rocky ground, the January sun warm on their backs despite the cold air. The trail wound through scrub brush and between boulders, following what might have once been a maintained path, but had long since surrendered to nature. Then the trees opened up, and there it was. Saguaro Lake spread before them, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting the sky and surrounding mountains in perfect stillness. And rising from the water about 30 yards from shore stood the bell tower, exactly as Marcus had imagined it, yet somehow more real, more substantial, more present. It was a cylinder of limestone blocks, maybe 40 feet tall and 20 feet in diameter. The lower 15 feet was submerged, the waterline marked by a dark stain that showed where lake level had varied over the decades. The stonework was weathered but intact, each block precisely cut and fitted. 4 arched windows punctured the upper level, their frames empty of glass but perfectly symmetrical. At the very top, a copper roof now green with patina crowned a bell housing, and through the opening, Marcus could see the dark shape of the bell itself, massive and silent. "Holy shit," Tommy breathed. "That's actually kind of beautiful." Marcus didn't respond. He was already calculating distance to shore, water depth, access points, structural stability. A stone causeway or bridge had once connected the tower to shore. You could see the remains of pilings jutting from the water like broken teeth, but it had collapsed long ago. The shore-facing side of the tower showed what looked like a doorway opening just above the current waterline. "How are you going to get in?" Tommy asked. Marcus was already pulling off his boots and jacket. "I'm going to swim." The water was cold enough to stop his heart. Marcus gasped as he waded in, the bottom rocky and uneven beneath his feet. But he'd trained in cold water during military exercises, and muscle memory took over. He pushed off and swam with strong, efficient strokes toward the tower. The distance wasn't far, maybe 80 feet, but the cold made it feel longer. His clothes grew heavy with water, pulling at him. He reached the tower and grabbed at the limestone around the doorway, his fingers finding purchase in gaps between stones. He pulled himself up onto a narrow ledge, water streaming from his clothes, his teeth already chattering. The doorway's wooden door had rotted away decades ago, leaving an opening just wide enough to squeeze through. Marcus pulled himself inside and stood dripping in darkness. He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through shadows to reveal a circular space, maybe 20 feet across. Its lower level flooded to a depth of 5 or 6 feet. But along the interior wall, a stone staircase spiraled upward, rising above the waterline. The air was cold, dank, heavy with moisture. But it didn't smell like death or decay, just age and stone and water. Marcus began climbing the stairs carefully. They were slick with algae where water had splashed, but the stone itself was solid, no cracks, no crumbling. Each step felt secure beneath his feet. At the top, he emerged into the main chamber. Afternoon light streamed through the 4 arched windows, illuminating a circular room littered with debris, broken glass, bird droppings, scattered feathers, pieces of rotted wood. The smell was stronger here, mold and animal waste and general decay. But the structural elements looked sound. The walls were thick limestone, easily 2 feet through. The ceiling was vaulted stone, not wood, which explained why it hadn't collapsed. The floor was stone as well, though covered in years of accumulated filth. Marcus walked slowly around the perimeter, his wet footsteps leaving dark prints. The windows offered views in 4 directions, Lake, mountains, distant city, more mountains. In the fading afternoon light, it was almost beautiful. Someone had built this place with care. The stonework wasn't just functional. It was crafted. The window arches were perfectly symmetrical. The vaulted ceiling showed careful engineering. Whoever created this had wanted it to last. He noticed other details. Rusted brackets where light fixtures had once hung, the ghost outline of shelves or cabinets on the walls, showing where paint had protected stone from aging, faded marks that might have been signs or decorations. This had been a real place once, with purpose and visitors and life. In the far corner, nearly hidden by debris and bird droppings, Marcus noticed something odd. A section of wall where the mortar looked different, lighter in color, maybe newer, though still obviously old. He knelt for a closer look. The stones in this area formed a rectangular outline, roughly 3 feet by 4 feet, like a blocked-up doorway or window that had been sealed. He pressed against it experimentally. The stones shifted slightly, just a fraction of an inch. Marcus's heart began to beat faster. He stood and examined the pattern more carefully. Definitely intentional. Someone had blocked this opening, and whoever did it hadn't used the same mortar as the original construction. The difference was subtle, you'd only notice if you were looking carefully, but it was there. Interesting. Above him, accessible by a wooden ladder that looked questionable, was the bell housing. Marcus tested the first rung. It held. He climbed carefully, the ladder creaking but supporting his weight, until he emerged into the open air at the top. The view stole his breath. The lake stretched out in every direction, surrounded by mountains now painted orange and gold by the setting sun. The city was visible in the distance, a hazy sprawl of buildings catching the last light. Up here, the wind was stronger, colder, but somehow cleaner, and hanging in the bell housing, massive and silent, was the bell itself. It was huge, maybe 4 feet tall and 3 feet in diameter, made of bronze or copper, dark with age. Cast into its surface were words in ornate script. Marcus brushed away dirt and cobwebs to read them. Celestial Resort 1926. May this bell ring in joy and peace. Marcus reached out and touched the bell's surface. It was cold, solid, real. He wondered when it had last rung. Decades ago, certainly. Maybe before he was born. He wondered what it would sound like, whether it would still have a voice after all these years of silence. The sun was setting now, painting the world in shades of fire. Marcus looked out over the landscape, feeling something shift inside him. This morning, he'd been a homeless veteran with a coffee can of savings and no prospects. Now he was standing on top of a bell tower he owned. Actually owned, watching the sun set over Arizona. Was it practical? No. Was it habitable? Not really. Was it crazy to spend his life savings on this? Absolutely. But it was his. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus owned something that couldn't be taken away, that didn't require permission or applications or someone else's approval. He owned solid stone and a century of history and a space in the world that was his alone. He climbed back down to the main chamber as darkness fell. Tommy would be worried, but Marcus needed a few more minutes. He sat with his back against the stone wall, still in his wet clothes, shivering but not quite ready to leave. The windows framed stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere across the lake, a bird called. The water lapped gently against the tower's foundation. Marcus pulled out the photograph of Sophia, protected in its Ziploc bag. 7 years old in this picture, gap-toothed smile, holding a kite they'd flown together at the park. She'd be 15 now. He hadn't seen her in 3 years, hadn't heard her voice, hadn't been allowed to be her father. But maybe now he had something to build toward. Not just survival, not just getting through another day, but an actual future. He didn't know what that looked like yet. He didn't know how to turn a half-sunken tower into anything useful. But for the first time since his discharge, Marcus felt something other than despair. He felt possibility. That night, after swimming back to shore and enduring Tommy's lecture about hypothermia, Marcus returned to the shelter. He lay in his bunk, still slightly damp, staring at the ceiling while men around him snored and coughed and muttered in nightmares. His mind raced with thoughts, plans, questions. The tower needed work that was obvious. But the bones were good, the structure was sound, and there was something about that sealed section of wall that intrigued him. Why would someone block up part of the tower? What had been there before? Was it just a window they'd closed? Or something else? Tomorrow he'd go back. He'd bring tools, basic stuff he could borrow or buy cheap. He'd start cleaning, exploring, understanding what he'd actually bought. He'd figure out how to make this work, step by step, the same way he'd learned to survive on the streets. One day at a time, one small decision at a time, building something from nothing through sheer stubborn refusal to give up. Marcus closed his eyes. For the first time in months, he fell asleep without dreading the nightmares. He dreamed instead of bells ringing clear and bright across still water, calling him home to a place he hadn't known he was looking for. A place where broken things could still stand, still matter, still have purpose. A place built on stone and hope, and the quiet determination of forgotten men who refused to stay buried. A tower in a lake, waiting through water and time to offer sanctuary to someone who needed it most. Marcus returned to the tower the next morning with borrowed supplies. A rusty crowbar from Tommy, a broom with half its bristles missing, 3 garbage bags, a bucket, and a pair of work gloves with holes in the fingers. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He'd learned in the military that you don't need perfect equipment, you need determination and the ability to improvise. The swim across was easier this time, knowing what to expect. The shock of cold water still stole his breath, but he powered through it, the waterproof bag with his tools strapped across his back. He pulled himself up onto the ledge and squeezed through the doorway. Water streaming from his clothes, already shivering but focused. The flooded lower level looked different in morning light filtering down from above. Marcus could see the bottom now through the murky waterstone floor, remarkably intact, covered in silt and decades of accumulated debris. The staircase spiraled up the curved wall, each step worn smooth in the center from countless feet that had climbed here when this place was alive with purpose. He ascended to the main chamber and set down his supplies. In daylight, the space looked both better and worse than he remembered. Better because the structural elements were even more solid than he'd thought. Those limestone walls would probably outlast the city itself. Worse because the amount of filth was staggering. Bird droppings covered every surface in thick, crusted layers. Broken glass glittered in corners. Something had died in here at some point, probably multiple somethings, and the smell made his eyes water. Marcus tied a bandana around his nose and mouth and got to work. He started by sweeping debris toward the center of the room, creating piles of glass, feathers, desiccated bird corpses, and unidentifiable organic matter. The broom handle snapped halfway through, so he finished with the crowbar, scraping filth into the garbage bags. By noon, he'd filled all 3 bags and barely made a dent. This was going to take weeks. But Marcus didn't mind. The work was physical, purposeful, and it kept his hands busy while his mind wandered. He thought about Sophia, wondered what she was doing right now, probably in school, 10th grade if his math was right. Did she ever think about him? Did Catherine tell her where he was? Or did they pretend he'd simply ceased to exist? He thought about Afghanistan, about Parker and the rest of his squad. Most of them had transitioned back to civilian life successfully. A few had stayed in, made the army their career. One had died by suicide, 3 years after discharge. Marcus had learned about it through a Facebook post that haunted him for months. And here he was, the one who'd supposedly held it together during deployment, now cleaning bird shit out of an abandoned tower because he had nowhere else to be. But that wasn't quite true anymore, was it? He wasn't here because he had nowhere else. He was here because he'd chosen this. He'd seen something everyone else missed and bet his last dollar on it. That meant something. By mid-afternoon, Marcus's attention kept returning to the sealed section of wall. He'd tried to ignore it, focus on the basic cleaning, but curiosity gnawed at him. Finally, he gave in. He cleared away the debris in that corner and examined the stonework more carefully. The sealed rectangle was about 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall, positioned roughly at chest height. The mortar holding these particular stones was definitely different from the original construction, lighter in color, slightly crumbly, not as expertly applied. Whoever had blocked this opening had done it in a hurry, or without proper materials, or both. Marcus wedged the crowbar into a mortar joint and began chipping away. The mortar crumbled easier than he expected, falling in chunks to the floor. After 20 minutes of careful work, he was able to wiggle one of the stones. It shifted inward with a grinding sound that echoed through the chamber. His heart pounded. He worked faster now, loosening more stones, pulling them out one by one and setting them aside. The opening grew wider. When it was large enough, Marcus shone his phone's flashlight through the gap. Behind the wall was a small chamber, not much bigger than a closet, carved into the thickness of the tower wall itself. And inside, barely visible in the dancing light, were shapes, rectangular shapes, boxes or crates of some kind. Marcus's hands shook as he widened the opening enough to crawl through. The hidden chamber smelled different from the main room, dry, dusty, but not moldy. The air was stale, but breathable. He squeezed through the gap, scraping his shoulders, and stood in the small space. 3 wooden crates sat against the far wall, each about 2 feet long, a foot wide, a foot deep. They were old, the wood was dark and weathered but intact. Stamped on the side of each crate were faded markings. C.R. 1929. Private. C.R. Celestial Resort. 1929. That was nearly 100 years ago. Marcus knelt in front of the first crate. His fingers trembled as he found the edge of the lid and pried it up. Nails screeched in protest, but the wood was old enough that it gave way. Inside, wrapped in what looked like oilcloth, were bundles of papers. He lifted one out carefully, unwrapped it, and found himself staring at official-looking documents covered in ornate printing. The paper was thick, high quality, yellowed, but not brittle. At the top of the first document, in elaborate script, United States of America, bearer bond. Marcus didn't know much about bonds, but he knew the word bearer was significant. Bearer bonds were like cash. Whoever physically possessed them owned them. His grandfather had mentioned them once, explaining they'd been popular before modern financial systems made them obsolete. This particular bond was issued by something called the Chicago and Northwestern Railway Company, dated April 15, 1928. The denomination printed at the bottom made Marcus's breath catch. $10,000. $10,000. In 1928. He had no idea what that would be worth now, but it had to be significant. With shaking hands, he unwrapped more bundles, more bonds, companies. He'd never heard of Detroit Steel Corporation, Allegheny Mining, Pacific Textile Mills, denominations ranging from $5,000 to $50,000. The dates were all between 1926 and 1929. The second crate contained smaller items wrapped in cloth. Marcus opened one, and gold coins spilled into his palm, heavy and cold and impossibly real. They were $20 gold pieces. He thought he'd seen pictures of them in history books. Each coin had an eagle on one side and Lady Liberty on the other. The date on the one he held read 1924. He opened more bundles. All gold coins, all from the 1920s. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds. The third crate was different. Inside were smaller items wrapped in protective oilcloth, each one carefully packed. Marcus unwrapped the first one and found a painting not large, maybe 10 inches by 12 inches of a woman's face. The style was distinctive, the colors still vibrant despite age. In the corner, a signature he couldn't quite make out. His mind reeled. This wasn't just old stuff someone had stored and forgotten. This was a hidden cache. Someone had deliberately sealed these crates in a secret chamber in the tower wall. Someone had gone to considerable effort to hide bonds, gold, and artwork where no one would find them. But who? And why? Marcus carefully rewrapped everything and crawled back out into the main chamber. He sat with his back against the wall, staring at the opening he'd created, trying to process what he'd found. This changed everything. He'd bought a condemned tower for $1,200, and inside that tower was what? A fortune? Evidence of a crime? Both? He needed information. He needed to understand what he was dealing with before he told anyone or moved anything. And he knew exactly where to start. The public library was warm and bright after the cold tower. Marcus had dried off as best he could at Tommy's apartment, changed into clean clothes from his backpack, and caught a bus downtown. He went straight to the reference desk where a young woman with kind eyes and stylish glasses looked up from her computer. "Can I help you find something?" "Yes, ma'am. I need information about Saguaro Lake. Old resorts that used to be out there. Anything historical, maps, newspapers, photographs. Whatever you've got." Her face brightened immediately. "Oh, local history. That's actually my specialty." She stood and extended her hand. "I'm Elena Martinez, head of the Arizona collection." Marcus shook her hand. Noticing her grip was firm and confident. She looked to be in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the eager expression of someone who genuinely loved her work. "Are you researching something specific?" Elena asked, as she led him toward the back of the library. "Sort of. I recently acquired some property out at the lake, the old bell tower from that abandoned resort. I wanted to learn about its history." Elena stopped walking and turned to stare at him. "You bought the Celestial Resort bell tower?" "Yes, ma'am. At auction last week." Her eyes went wide. "That thing's still standing, mostly underwater. But yes, standing and solid." Elena's entire demeanor changed. shifting from helpful librarian to excited historian. "Come with me. You absolutely need to see what I have." She led him through a door marked "Staff Only" to a climate-controlled room lined with filing cabinets and archival boxes. "This is our special collections room. Original documents, historical photographs, things that need protection from light and humidity." She went directly to a specific cabinet, pulled out a large folder, and spread its contents across a reading table. "The Celestial Resort," she said, her voice taking on the enthusiasm of someone sharing a favorite topic. "I actually wrote part of my master's thesis about it. Most people in Phoenix have completely forgotten it existed. But in its time, it was famous, or maybe infamous is a better word." The folder contained photographs, newspaper clippings, and architectural drawings. Marcus leaned forward, studying an image of the resort in its prime. The photographs showed an elaborate complex of Spanish colonial buildings with pristine grounds, a large main lodge, several smaller structures, and in the center of the lake, connected by an ornate stone bridge, the bell tower looking exactly as it must have looked the day it was finished. "It was built in 1926, Elena explained, pulling up another photograph. This one showed a stern-looking man in an expensive suit, probably in his 40s, standing in front of the resort. By this man, Vincent Castellano. He was from Chicago, officially listed as being in import-export business. But she lowered her voice even though they were alone. Most historians believe he was connected to organized crime, Prohibition era. The resort was supposedly legitimate, but there were always rumors. Marcus studied Castellano's face. Hard eyes, expensive clothes, the posture of a man used to being obeyed. What kind of rumors? That the resort was a front. That Castellano used it for meetings with other criminals. That he smuggled bootleg liquor through Arizona. That the import-export business was actually trafficking stolen goods. Elena pulled out a newspaper clipping. He was investigated multiple times but never charged with anything. He had connections, money, and apparently very good lawyers. What happened to him? Elena's expression turned mysterious. That's where it gets really interesting. In October of 1929, right before the stock market crash, Vincent Castellano disappeared, just vanished. His wife reported him missing. The Chicago police investigated. The FBI got involved, but they found nothing. No body, no evidence of foul play, no indication of where he went. She laid out more documents. The resort struggled on for a few years without him, but it couldn't survive both the depression and the loss of its founder. It was abandoned by 1933. For decades afterward, people searched it, looking for Castellano's rumored fortune. Marcus's pulse quickened. Fortune? Oh yes, the big legend. Elena's eyes sparkled with the joy of a good mystery. The story goes that Castellano knew the crash was coming, that he'd gotten wind of how bad things were about to get, and converted most of his assets to gold, bearer bonds, maybe even cash. The theory is he was planning to disappear with his fortune, start over somewhere else, South America, Europe, who knows. But then something happened. Some people think he was murdered by rival gangsters. Others believe he faked his death and got away. But the fortune, if it existed, was never found. People searched for it extensively. Treasure hunters combed through the resort ruins for years. They tore apart buildings, dug up the grounds, even brought in metal detectors in the 60s. But they never found anything substantial. Eventually, people decided it was just a legend, that either Castellano never had a fortune, or he took it with him, or it was spent before he disappeared. Elena gestured to the bell tower in the photographs. The tower was his pet project. He personally oversaw its construction, insisted on imported limestone, even brought the bell from Italy. Some people thought if he'd hidden anything, it would be there. But the tower was searched too, multiple times. Nothing. Marcus forced himself to keep his expression neutral, even as his mind raced. They'd searched the tower, but had they found the hidden chamber? Or had they missed it? Looking for something obvious, instead of subtle alterations in the stonework. "Can I get copies of all this?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Elena studied him for a long moment. "You found something, didn't you?" "Eh? What makes you say that?" "Because you have the look of someone who just realized they stumbled into a much bigger story than they expected." She smiled. "It's okay. I'm a librarian, not a treasure hunter. My interest is purely historical documentation. But, yes, if you find anything significant out there, I would love to know about it, for research purposes. If I find anything, you'll be the first person I tell," Marcus promised, meaning it. "Can I ask you something else? The tower, you said, it was Castellano's pet project. Do you know if there was anything unusual about its construction? Any details that stood out?" Elena flipped through papers until she found an architectural drawing. "Here. This is from the county archives. Original plans for the tower." She spread it out. The drawing showed a simple cylindrical structure with a single large room and the bell housing above. "But that's interesting," Elena said, pointing to a note in the margin. "See this. It says, 'Foundation modifications per V.C. Specifications. V.C. Vincent Castellano.' He made changes to the foundation design after construction started. The architect wasn't happy about it. There are memos in the file about concerns regarding structural integrity given the changes." "What kind of changes?" "The notes aren't specific. Just that Castellano insisted on additional excavation and reinforcement work below the waterline. The architect thought it was unnecessary and expensive. But Castellano paid for it. So," she shrugged, "he got what he wanted. Below the waterline. Additional excavation." Marcus's heart was pounding now, but he kept his face neutral. "Can I get a copy of this drawing?" "Of course. I'll make copies of everything." Marcus spent the next hour going through every document Elena had, making notes, studying photographs. He learned that the resort had employed over 50 people at its peak, that Castellano had lived there full-time with his wife, Victoria, that there had been rumors of secret passages in the main lodge, never proven, but persistent. That after Castellano's disappearance, Victoria had returned to Chicago and died in 1947 without ever speaking publicly about her husband. When Marcus finally left the library, his backpack was heavy with copied documents, and his mind was spinning with possibilities. Additional excavation below the waterline. Foundation modifications. A man who knew the crash was coming and had the means and motive to hide his fortune. The next morning, Marcus returned to the tower with different supplies. A waterproof flashlight. A small diving mask he'd bought at a sporting goods store for $20, and Tommy's rubber waders that were too big but better than nothing. "You're going underwater?" Tommy had asked, incredulously when Marcus borrowed them. "Just checking the foundation." "Man, that's crazy. That water's probably full of snakes and God knows what else." "Probably," Marcus agreed. "But I need to see something." I need to see something. Now, standing in the tower's lower level, water lapping at the third step of the staircase. Marcus put on the waders and the diving mask. The water was murky. Visibility maybe 3 feet at best. He waded in, the cold water immediately seeping through a leak in the waders, soaking his left leg. The flooded lower level was roughly circular, matching the tower's diameter. Marcus moved slowly along the perimeter, running his hands along the stone wall, feeling for anything unusual. The limestone was smooth, covered in slippery algae. Unremarkable. He took a deep breath and ducked his head under the water. The mask helped, but the murky water made it hard to see anything clearly. He surfaced, wiped the mask, and tried again. Slowly, methodically, he worked his way around the chamber, feeling the walls, looking for any variation in the stonework. It took almost an hour before his fingers found it a seam. Not a crack from age or settling, but a deliberate seam, nearly invisible unless you were looking for it. Marcus traced it with his fingers. It formed a rectangular outline, about 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall, starting about 2 feet below the current waterline. His heart hammered against his ribs. He surfaced, gasping, and pulled off the mask. A door, or a hatch. Some kind of opening, sealed shut and hidden underwater where no one would think to look. He dove again, running his hands over the seam, searching for any kind of mechanism or handle. His fingers found a small depression on one side, maybe a keyhole. No, something else. He surfaced for air, dove again, examining it more carefully. It was a locking mechanism, he realized, but not a typical one. More like a puzzle, several stone pieces that needed to be pressed in a specific sequence or pattern. He experimented, pressing different combinations. Nothing happened. After 30 minutes of trying, his fingers were numb and he was shivering uncontrollably. He needed to warm up, rethink his approach. He climbed out of the water, stripped off the waders, and sat shivering on the stairs, wrapped in the emergency blanket he'd brought. Think. Castellano had modified the foundation, added something below the waterline. He'd hidden bonds and gold in a chamber above water. Why not hide more below water? It made sense no casual treasure hunter would think to dive in murky water in an abandoned tower. Even if they had, they'd need to know exactly where to look and how to open whatever he'd built. Marcus thought about the hidden chamber upstairs, about the bonds dated up to 1929, about Castellano disappearing in October of that year. The man had been preparing to leave, converting assets to portable wealth, hiding it where it couldn't be seized or stolen. He remembered something Elena had shown him, a photograph of Castellano standing in front of the tower. He pulled out the copy from his backpack and studied it closely. In the photo, Castellano wore a distinctive ring on his right hand. It was large, ornate, with what looked like a seal or emblem, a seal, like the kind used to stamp wax, or... Marcus dove back into the water, this time examining the lock mechanism more carefully. It wasn't a sequence of presses. It was a shape. The depressions formed a pattern, a circle surrounded by smaller circles. Maybe 7 or 8 of them. He surfaced and examined the photograph again. The ring on Castellano's hand had a similar pattern, a sunburst or starburst design, but Marcus didn't have the ring. He didn't have anything that would fit that shape. Unless, he thought about the hidden chamber upstairs. Had there been anything else in those crates? Something he'd missed in his shock at finding the bonds and gold? Marcus climbed the stairs, still dripping, and crawled back through the opening into the hidden chamber. He went through the crates more carefully this time, removing everything, checking every corner. In the bottom of the second crate, beneath the bundles of gold coins, his fingers touched something hard and metal. He pulled it out, a small bronze disc, about 3 inches in diameter, with a raised pattern on one face. A sunburst. 8 rays emanating from a central circle. His hands shook as he carried it back downstairs. He waded into the water, took a deep breath, and dove. He pressed the bronze disc against the lock mechanism. It fit perfectly, the raised pattern matching the depressions. He pressed it firmly and felt something click. The sound echoed through the water. Marcus surfaced, gasping, his heart racing. He dove again, and this time, when he pressed against the stone panel, it moved. Not much, just an inch, but enough to show it wasn't solid wall. It was a door. He surfaced, climbed out of the water, and pulled on the waders again. This was going to take leverage. He retrieved the crowbar and waded back in. Diving down, he wedged the crowbar into the gap he'd created and pried. The door resisted. Decades of sediment and pressure held it shut. Marcus surfaced for air, dove again, pried harder. The crowbar slipped, scraping his knuckles against stone. He ignored the pain and tried again. On his 4th attempt, something gave. The door shifted outward with a grinding sound he could hear even underwater. Marcus's lungs were burning, but he kept prying. The door opened another inch, another. Finally, it swung open far enough for him to see inside. He surfaced, gasping, his vision spotting from lack of oxygen and adrenaline. He waited for his breathing to steady, then dove one more time. Through the open doorway was another chamber, larger than the one upstairs, carved into the foundation of the tower below the normal waterline. The space was flooded, but Marcus could see shapes inside larger crates, stacked against the walls. He surfaced and climbed out, sitting on the stairs, shaking from cold and excitement and shock. He'd found it. Whatever Castellano had hidden, this was it. This was the vault. But the space was underwater. He couldn't just wade in and look around. He needed proper diving equipment, or he needed to pump out the water, or... Marcus stopped, thought. The chamber was sealed, which meant it was airtight, or had been when it was built. If he could figure out how to drain it, the contents would be preserved. But how? He examined the door more carefully. On the inside edge, he found a valve brass, crusted with age but intact. He experimented with it and heard water beginning to drain, gurgling down through some kind of channel in the foundation. Castellano had built a drainage system. It took 3 hours for the water level to drop enough for Marcus to enter the vault. By then, it was late afternoon, and he was exhausted, but there was no way he was stopping now. He waded through the remaining water, now only about a foot deep, and into the chamber. It was maybe 8 feet on each side, carved from solid stone. The walls were lined with metal shelving, and on those shelves were crates, boxes, and sealed containers. Marcus's flashlight beam swept across labels. C. R. Private collection. V. C. Personal. Secure assets. His hands shook as he opened the first crate. Inside were more bearer bonds, but these were different higher denominations, different companies, hundreds of them carefully wrapped and preserved. The second crate contained more gold coins, but also gold bars, actual bars, stamped with assayer marks and dates from the 1920s. The third crate made Marcus's knees buckle. It was filled with artwork, not just the small pieces from upstairs, but larger paintings, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed in waterproof containers. He unwrapped one carefully and found himself staring at a stunning portrait, signed in the corner with a name he recognized even with his limited art knowledge: Remington. There was more. Stock certificates from companies that no longer existed, or did they? He'd have to research that. Jewelry, diamond necklaces, gold watches, ruby brooches, legal documents, including what looked like property deeds and business contracts. A ledger book, with meticulous entries in elegant handwriting, listing everything in the vault with dates and values. Marcus sat down hard on the wet floor, his back against the cold stone wall. He pulled out the ledger and flipped to the last page. At the bottom, written in that same careful hand, was a summary. Total assets secured. The 14th of October, 1929 bearer bonds. $16,200,000. Gold coin and bullion. $3,800,000. Artwork and collectibles. $2,300,000. Estimated total value: $22,300,000. $22 million. In 1929, Marcus had no idea what the current value would be with nearly a century of interest and inflation. But it had to be. His mind couldn't even process the number. He sat there for a long time, shivering in his wet clothes, staring at crates filled with more wealth than he'd ever imagined existing. He thought about yesterday morning, waking up in a shelter, eating breakfast from a food bank, wondering if he'd find any day labor to earn enough for dinner. Now he was sitting in a secret vault full of treasure that could change his life. That could change Sophia's life. He stopped that train of thought. First, he needed to understand what he'd found, and whether it was legally his. He needed help, advice, lawyers probably. He couldn't just walk into a bank with a suitcase full of 1920s bearer bonds and gold. Marcus carefully closed the crates and made his way back into the tower's main chamber. He was exhausted, soaking wet, and shaking from cold and shock. He needed to leave, get warm, think clearly about his next steps. But as he started toward the doorway, something made him pause. A sound, not from inside the tower, but from outside, the soft scrape of rubber against stone. Then silence. Marcus froze. He turned off his flashlight and moved quietly to one of the windows. In the fading afternoon light, he could just make out a small, inflatable boat pulled up against the tower's base. And standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the light, was a figure, a man. Watching him. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Then the figure disappeared, and Marcus heard the sound of someone swimming away quickly, powerfully. By the time he reached the doorway, the boat was 50 yards away, moving fast toward the opposite shore. The figure wore dark clothing and a cap pulled low, making identification impossible. Marcus's heart pounded. Someone had followed him here. Someone knew what he was doing. Someone had been watching. He stood in the doorway as the boat disappeared around a bend in the shoreline, trying to control his breathing. His mind racing. How much had they seen? How long had they been watching? Did they know what he'd found? The tower suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a target. Marcus had spent years being invisible, surviving by not being noticed. Now, someone had noticed. Someone knew. And in that moment, standing in the doorway of his tower with a fortune in the vault below, Marcus realized that finding treasure wasn't the hard part. Keeping it would be. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He lay in his shelter bunk staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment over and over. The figure in the doorway. The eyes meeting his. The quick retreat. Someone knew. The question was, who? And what would they do with that knowledge? By morning, he'd made a decision. He couldn't handle this alone. He needed help, and he needed it from people he could trust. He waited until the library opened, then went straight to the reference desk. "Elena," he said quietly when she looked up, "I need to talk to you. Privately." Something in his voice made her eyes sharpen. "The special collections room, please." 10 minutes later, Marcus was spreading photographs across the reading table images he'd taken with his phone of the bearer bonds, the gold coins, the artwork, the ledger with its careful accounting. Eleanor's hand went to her mouth as she studied each picture. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's real. Castellano's fortune. It was in the tower all along, hidden below the waterline where no one thought to look." Marcus's voice was flat with exhaustion. $22 million in 1929 dollars. I have no idea what it's worth now. Hundreds of millions, probably. Elena looked up at him, her expression shifting from excitement to concern. "Marcus, this is enormous. Life-changing. Enormous, but also dangerous. Enormous. I know. Someone was watching me yesterday. At the tower, they saw me come out of the vault." Elena's eyes widened. "Did you see? Who?" "No. They were too far away, and they left before I could get a good look." He ran his hands through his hair. "Elena, I need help. I need to understand what I'm legally entitled to, how to protect this discovery, who to notify. I'm a homeless veteran with a high school education. I'm way out of my depth here." Elena was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she pulled out her phone. "I know someone. David Ramirez. He's a lawyer who does pro bono work for veterans. He helped my cousin after he got back from Iraq and was having issues with his discharge benefits. Good guy, smart. And he doesn't back down from fights. I can't afford a lawyer. That's why I said pro bono. Let me call him." An hour later, Marcus was sitting in a modest law office on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades. David Ramirez was in his mid-30s, wearing jeans and a button-down with the sleeves rolled up, his desk covered in case files and coffee rings. He had the look of someone who worked too hard for not enough money and didn't regret it. Marcus laid out the entire story. Buying the tower, finding the hidden chamber, discovering the vault, the figure watching from the boat. David listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, his expression growing more focused with each detail. When Marcus finished, David sat back in his chair. "Can I see the photographs?" "Grapta." Marcus handed over his phone. David scrolled through the images slowly, occasionally zooming in on specific details. When he got to the ledger page with the total valuation, he whistled low. "This is extraordinary and extremely complicated." He set the phone down. "First things first, do you have legal ownership of the property where this was found?" "Yes." Marcus pulled out the deed. "Purchased at auction, paid in full, properly recorded with the county." David examined the deed. "Good. That's your foundation. Arizona treasure trove law generally states that discovered property belongs to the landowner unless someone can prove superior claim. But with something this valuable, you're going to face challenges from multiple directions. Like what? Descendants of Vincent Castellano might claim it's part of his estate. The state will argue it's historically significant and belongs in a museum. The federal government might get involved if any of this was obtained through criminal activity. And let's be honest, a bootlegger's fortune probably has some legally questionable origins. Treasure hunters will come out claiming they should have found it first. David leaned forward. Plus, you've got the complication that this involves bearer bonds and gold. The IRS is going to want their cut. Banks might challenge whether those old bonds are still redeemable. Art museums could claim the paintings were stolen decades ago. Marcus felt his stomach sink. So you're saying, even though I found it on my property, I might not get to keep any of it? No. I'm saying it's going to be a fight. But it's a fight we can win if we're smart about it. David's expression turned determined. Here's what works in your favor. You legally own the property. You discovered the cash through legitimate renovation work. You're immediately seeking proper legal counsel instead of trying to liquidate assets or hide the discovery. That shows good faith. And frankly, the optics are great. Homeless veteran finds fortune, faces down powerful interests trying to take it. That plays well both in court and in public opinion. I don't want this to be a media circus. I understand. But we might need public pressure to protect you from people with more money and power who'll try to bury you in legal fees. David pulled out a legal pad. We need to move fast. File a proper declaration with the state. Secure the assets. Get expert appraisals. And prepare for the legal challenges that are coming. Can you restrict access to the tower? It's in the middle of a lake. The only access is by swimming or boat. That helps. Don't go back alone. Don't tell anyone else what you found, not friends, not shelter staff, no one. And if anyone approaches you with offers or threats, you refer them to me immediately. Marcus nodded. What about costs? I can't. David waved him off. We'll figure it out. If we win, you'll pay me from the settlement. If we lose, he shrugged, then I spent some time fighting the good fight. I've done worse with my hours. They spent the next 2 hours going over details, documenting everything, planning strategy. By the time Marcus left, he had a lawyer, a plan, and a knot of anxiety in his stomach that wouldn't go away. The news broke 3 days later, faster than Marcus had expected. Someone he never found out who leaked information to a local news blogger who specialized in Arizona oddities and treasure hunting stories. The post was sensational, but surprisingly accurate. Homeless veteran discovers hidden vault in abandoned lake tower, fortune inside. Within 24 hours, it was picked up by legitimate news outlets. TV crews showed up at the lake. Reporters tracked down Patricia, the auctioneer, who confirmed Marcus had purchased the property. Elena found herself being interviewed about the historical significance, and Marcus discovered what it was like to have his phone, a basic, prepaid model, blow up with calls from numbers he didn't recognize. David fielded most of them. Reporters wanting interviews, treasure hunting companies offering to partner on the discovery, a man claiming to be Vincent Castellano's great-nephew demanding Marcus turn over the assets immediately. And, ominously, a lawyer representing something called the Desert Exploration Society, threatening legal action if Marcus didn't cease unlawful appropriation of culturally significant artifacts. That last one's interesting, David said when they met to discuss the developments. I looked into the Desert Exploration Society. It's a front organization registered just 6 days ago. Basically a shell company set up to look legitimate. Someone's trying to establish legal standing to challenge your claim. Who? That's what I'm trying to figure out. But whoever it is has money and moved fast. David's jaw tightened. We need to move faster. They filed a formal declaration with the Arizona Department of Revenue and the State Historic Preservation Office, documenting the discovery and asserting Marcus's ownership claim under Arizona treasure trove law. David also filed a motion with the county court for a declaratory judgment, basically asking a judge to officially rule on who owned the treasure before things got more complicated. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within a week, Marcus faced 3 separate lawsuits. The first came from a man named Richard Castellano, claiming to be Vincent Castellano's great-great-nephew, and arguing the fortune was part of Vincent's estate, which had never been properly settled. He wanted everything turned over to him as the rightful heir. The second lawsuit came from the Arizona Historical Trust, arguing that items of such historical significance couldn't be privately owned and should be seized for public preservation in state museums. The third, and most aggressive, came from a coalition calling themselves the Castellano Recovery Trust, which David quickly identified as being funded by James Thornton, a Phoenix real estate developer with a reputation for aggressive business tactics and connections to city politics. Thornton wants the land, David explained, after researching the backgrounds. Not just your tower, but that entire section of the lake. There've been rumors for years about a development project out there, luxury homes, a marina, resort amenities. Your tower sits right in the middle of where he wants to build. If he can claim the treasure and force you into bankruptcy fighting him, he can probably get the property for pennies. Marcus felt sick. This isn't about history or rightful heirs. It's about money and real estate. Welcome to the American legal system. David's voice was grim. But here's the thing, Thornton overplayed his hand. Creating a fake historical society, filing a frivolous lawsuit, using intimidation tactics. We can fight this. We just need resources. I don't have resources. No. But you have a story. And sometimes, that's more powerful. Elena helped coordinate what came next. She contacted local veteran organizations, explaining Marcus's situation. A homeless vet who'd scraped together his last dollars to buy property, made an incredible discovery, and now faced wealthy interests trying to steal it from him. The response was immediate and passionate. The Arizona Veterans Alliance issued a statement supporting Marcus's claim and offering to help fund his legal defense. The Homeless Veterans Advocacy Group held a press conference on the steps of the county courthouse. Tommy organized other shelter residents to attend Marcus's court hearings, filling the gallery with veterans in worn jackets, displaying their service medals. "We take care of our own," Tommy told a TV reporter outside the courthouse. Marcus served this country. He came home broken, and the system failed him. Now, he's finally caught a break, and they're trying to take it away. That's not happening. Not on our watch. But support brought backlash. Marcus started receiving threatening phone calls, anonymous voices warning him to take a settlement and walk away, or he'd regret making this difficult. Someone slashed the tires on Tommy's truck. A brick was thrown through the library window. Late one night, the police report noted it happened near the Arizona collection room, where Elena worked. The worst came on a cold February evening. Marcus was walking back to the shelter when a black SUV pulled up beside him. 2 men got out, large, professional, the kind of people who got paid to intimidate. "Marcus Webb?" the first one asked, though he clearly knew the answer. "Yeah. Mr. Thornton would like to speak with you. He's prepared to offer you $2 million for the property and all contents. Cash. Today. You sign the papers, the money transfers, and all this legal trouble goes away. Marcus's heart pounded, but he kept his voice steady. Tell Mr. Thornton, I'm not interested. The second man stepped closer. You should think carefully. The legal fees are going to bury you. Even if you win, which you won't, you'll spend years in court. Thornton has unlimited resources. You're sleeping in a shelter. How long do you really think you can fight? As long as it takes. $2 million, Webb. That's more money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. Take it and move on. I said no. The first man's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. Thornton gets what he wants. Always. You can do this easy, or you can do it hard. But the outcome's the same either way. Marcus thought about his combat training. About standing his ground under pressure. You're threatening a veteran on a public street. That seems stupid. My lawyer would love to add witness intimidation to the lawsuit. The men exchanged glances. The second one leaned in close enough that Marcus could smell his cologne. You think your lawyer scares us? You think those shelter bums and bleeding heart veterans groups matter? Thornton owns people in this city, real people with real power. You're nobody. And when this is over, you'll still be nobody. Only poorer and more broken than you already are. They got back in the SUV and drove away, leaving Marcus standing on the sidewalk, shaking not from fear, but from rage. He pulled out his phone and called David immediately. They just threatened you on camera, David said, after Marcus recounted the conversation. Marcus looked around, confused. David continued. See that building across the street? The one with the security company logo? I had them set up surveillance 2 days ago after the phone threat started. We've got the whole thing on video. Marcus felt something shift. Maybe he wasn't as powerless as they thought. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for mid-March. David had filed motions to consolidate all 3 lawsuits into a single proceeding, arguing that the court needed to make one clear determination of ownership rather than fighting separate battles. Judge Sarah Mendoza, a no-nonsense jurist with 20 years on the bench, agreed. This court will hear evidence from all parties, she announced at the first hearing, and make a comprehensive ruling on ownership, distribution, and appropriate compensation. I'm not interested in piecemeal litigation that drags out for years. We're going to settle this properly. The courtroom was packed. Marcus sat at the defense table with David, wearing his only suit borrowed from a veteran organization. Behind them, the gallery was filled with veterans, shelter residents, and community supporters. On the other side, James Thornton sat with 3 expensive lawyers in tailored suits, looking confident and cold. Richard Castellano, the supposed great-great-nephew, sat with his own lawyer. Though David had already found evidence suggesting the family connection was dubious, at best. The state's attorney, representing the historical trust, looked uncomfortable being lumped in with Thornton, but prepared to argue their case nonetheless. The hearing stretched over 3 days. Thornton's lawyers argued that Marcus had engaged in illegal treasure hunting, that the property sale was invalid because the auction hadn't properly disclosed the potential for valuable discoveries, that the assets belonged to the state under cultural heritage laws. David systematically dismantled each argument. He presented the auction documents showing Marcus had purchased the property as is, where is, with no representations about condition or contents. He cited Arizona treasure trove law, chapter and verse. He showed photographs of the tower's condition at the time of purchase, clearly abandoned, obviously forgotten, with no indication anyone had valued it or searched it properly in decades. Mr. Webb didn't go treasure hunting, David argued. He bought what everyone else considered worthless property and discovered something hidden in the walls during legitimate renovation work. That's exactly what Arizona law protects property owners who make unexpected discoveries on land they legally own. The state's attorney argued that the historical significance of the discovery overrode normal property rights. David countered with cases establishing that historical significance alone wasn't grounds for seizure without compensation, and that Arizona law didn't give the state blanket authority to confiscate private discoveries. Richard Castellano's claim fell apart under examination. David's research had revealed he was actually a fourth cousin, twice removed, barely related at all, and that Vincent Castellano's estate had been properly settled in 1947, with all known assets distributed according to his will. Claims that some mysterious fortune existed separately from the estate were just speculation. You can't assert inheritance rights to something that was never listed as part of the estate, David argued. Mr. Castellano either doesn't know it existed, or he deliberately excluded it, or it never belonged to the estate in the first place. Either way, Mr. Richard Castellano has no legal standing. But the most dramatic moment came on day 2, when David played the surveillance video of Thornton's men threatening Marcus on the street. "This is what my client faces," David told the court. "Not just legal challenges, but physical intimidation from people with power and money who want to take what he legally found. Mr. Thornton claims he's protecting historical assets, but the evidence shows he's running a sophisticated intimidation campaign to force my client to surrender property that Thornton wants for commercial development." Judge Mendoza's expression was thunderous as she watched the video. "Is Mr. Thornton present in this courtroom?" Thornton stood, his face flushed. "Yes, Your Honor. I will see you and your counsel in my chambers." Immediately, what happened in chambers remained private. But when they emerged, Thornton looked shaken, and his lawyers looked professionally embarrassed. Judge Mendoza announced that she was ordering an investigation into witness intimidation, and that any further threats or harassment would result in criminal referrals and sanctions. On day 3, David called witnesses. Tommy testified about Marcus's character, about how he'd never caused trouble at the shelter, how he'd helped other veterans, how he'd saved every dollar to buy property and build something better. Elena testified about the historical research, confirming that multiple searches of the tower over decades had found nothing, that Marcus's discovery was genuinely unexpected. Then David called Marcus himself. Marcus walked to the stand in his borrowed suit, raised his right hand, and swore to tell the truth. David's questions were straightforward. Describe your military service. Describe what happened when you came home. Describe how you ended up homeless. Describe why you bought the tower. Describe what you found. Marcus answered simply and honestly. He didn't try to make himself sound better or more sympathetic than he was. He just told the truth about Afghanistan, about PTSD, about losing everything, about seeing an auction flyer and thinking maybe, just maybe, he could build something from ruins. "When you found the treasure," David asked, "why didn't you just keep it quiet? Take what you could carry and disappear?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Because that would be theft, and because I served my country with honor. I wasn't going to come home and become a thief." He looked directly at Judge Mendoza. "Also, I've been invisible for 3 years. People look through me like I don't exist. I wanted to do this right, legally. So maybe people would see me as someone who still had integrity." The courtroom was silent. Even Thornton's lawyers looked uncomfortable. Thornton's attorneys tried to shake Marcus on cross-examination, suggesting he'd known about the treasure before buying the property, implying he'd manipulated the auction, questioning his competence to manage such valuable assets. But Marcus remained steady, answering each question with quiet dignity. "Isn't it true you're homeless because you made poor decisions?" one lawyer asked aggressively. "I'm homeless because I have PTSD and couldn't afford treatment when my insurance ran out," Marcus replied calmly. "I made the decision to serve my country. After that, a lot of decisions got made for me," the lawyer pressed. "And you expect this court to believe you're capable of responsibly managing hundreds of millions of dollars? No, sir. I expect the court to rule on whether I legally own what I found. What I do with it after that is my business." The final arguments came on day 4. Thornton's lawyers made an aggressive case that Marcus was an opportunistic squatter exploiting legal loopholes, that the treasure was too valuable to be left in private hands, that proper stewardship required sophisticated institutional management. David's closing was simpler. Vincent Castellano built a tower and hid his fortune where no one could find it. For 95 years, it sat there, waiting. Wealthy treasure hunters searched and found nothing. The state had multiple opportunities to discover this, and didn't. But Marcus Webb, a homeless veteran with $1,200 and nothing to lose, bought property everyone else thought was worthless, and he found what no one else could find. Under Arizona law, that makes it his. Everything else is just powerful people trying to take from someone who has less power. This court shouldn't allow that. Judge Mendoza took 2 weeks to reach her decision. Those 2 weeks were agony for Marcus. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, spent his nights pacing the shelter hallways or walking the dark streets, wondering if he'd fought this whole battle just to lose everything in the end. Tommy tried to keep his spirits up. "You did good in there, man. Real good. Judge saw you telling the truth." "Truth doesn't always win," Marcus replied. "It does, when the other side's being run by a slimeball like Thornton." Elena was cautiously optimistic. Judge Mendoza has a reputation for following the law even when it's not popular. And the law is pretty clear here. You own the property. You found the treasure. It's yours. Unless someone can prove superior claim, none of them proved that. But David was realistic. "We made a strong case, the best case we could make. But treasure trove cases are unpredictable. Judges have a lot of discretion. She could rule that you own it outright. Or she could rule that you're entitled to a finder's fee but the assets belong to the state. Or she could split it various ways. We just have to wait." The ruling came on April 2nd. Judge Mendoza's chambers called at 9 in the morning. Decision rendered. Hearing scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon. Marcus spent those 5 hours in a haze. He sat in the library, unable to focus on anything. Elena brought him coffee he didn't drink. Tommy showed up to provide moral support and nervous energy. David reviewed his notes for what felt like the 100th time. At 1:30, they walked to the courthouse. The gallery was packed again. Veterans, reporters, curious citizens, Thornton and his lawyers looking confident. Marcus took his seat at the defense table, his hands shaking slightly. Judge Mendoza entered at precisely 2 o'clock. Everyone stood. She sat, arranged her papers, and looked out over the courtroom with an expression that revealed nothing. "This has been one of the most interesting cases I've presided over in my 20 years on the bench," she began. "The facts are extraordinary, the legal questions complex, and the stakes significant. I've considered all evidence, reviewed all relevant case law, and consulted with colleagues who have expertise in treasure trove and property law. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. He couldn't breathe. The law in Arizona is clear, Judge Mendoza continued. Treasure trove, which includes hidden assets of unknown ownership, belongs to the finder. If discovered on property, the finder owns legally. There are exceptions for artifacts of significant cultural heritage, for stolen property, and for cases where someone can prove superior ownership claim. She looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Webb purchased the property legally at public auction. He discovered the hidden assets during legitimate renovation work. He immediately sought legal counsel and reported the discovery to appropriate authorities. His actions throughout have demonstrated good faith. None of the challenging parties has successfully proven superior ownership claim. Marcus couldn't tell if that was good or bad. He felt dizzy. The claim that Mr. Webb knew about the treasure before purchase is unsupported by evidence. The claim that the auction was invalid due to non-disclosure is without merit. The property was sold as is, where is, with no representations. The claim that these assets are part of Vincent Castellano's estate fails because the estate was settled decades ago and these assets were never listed. The claim that historical significance overrides property rights is not supported by Arizona law, absent specific statutory provisions that don't apply here. Judge Mendoza's expression hardened as she looked toward Thornton. As for the intimidation and harassment documented in this case, that weighs heavily against any party engaging in such conduct. This court will not reward bad faith behavior. She paused, consulting her notes. Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that Marcus Webb is the legal owner of all assets discovered in the bell tower, subject to standard tax obligations to state and federal authorities. The challenging lawsuits are dismissed with prejudice. The courtroom erupted. Veterans in the gallery cheered. Reporters rushed for doors to file stories. Thornton's face went purple with rage. His lawyers looked stunned. Marcus sat frozen, unable to process what he'd just heard. David grabbed his shoulder. "We won, Marcus. We won. It's yours." But Marcus didn't feel like celebrating. He felt numb. Judge Mendoza banged her gavel for order. "However," she continued, and the room quieted, "this court has concerns about Mr. Cease Webb's ability to properly manage assets of this magnitude without appropriate support. Therefore, I am ordering the establishment of a trust structure with professional financial oversight to ensure responsible stewardship. Mr. Webb will retain full ownership and decision-making authority, but with guidance to prevent exploitation or mismanagement." She looked at Marcus again, her expression softening slightly. "You've won a great fortune, Mr. Webb. I hope it brings you the security and opportunity you've earned. But money alone doesn't fix what's broken. I encourage you to seek support, not just financial advice, but counseling, community, purpose." Court is adjourned. The gavel fell. The courtroom erupted again. People surrounded Marcus, congratulating him, shaking his hand, asking for interviews. But Marcus pushed through the crowd and walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun. He walked for blocks, not really seeing where he was going. Eventually, he found himself at a small park and sat on a bench. David found him there 20 minutes later. "Hey," David said, sitting beside him. "You okay?" "I don't know what I am. You just won hundreds of millions of dollars." "Yeah." Marcus's voice was flat. They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Marcus spoke. "When I was in that tower the first time, When I bought it for $1,200, I felt hope. Real hope. For the first time in years. Not because I thought I'd find treasure, but because I owned something. I had a place. I wasn't invisible anymore. And now I have more money than I can imagine. And I feel, he struggled for the word, empty. Like I just fought this huge battle and won. But I'm not sure what I actually won. David nodded slowly. Money doesn't fix trauma. It doesn't cure PTSD. It doesn't give you back the years you lost, or the relationships that broke. It just removes certain kinds of suffering and replaces them with different problems. So, what was the point? The point, David said carefully, is that now you have resources to build something. Not just for yourself, but for others. You have the power to make choices instead of having choices made for you. That's not nothing, Marcus. That's actually everything. But it's up to you to decide what to do with it. Marcus thought about Sophia, about Tommy, and the other veterans at the shelter, about Elena and her passion for preserving history, about all the people who'd supported him when powerful interests tried to crush him. The judge said money doesn't fix what's broken. Marcus said quietly. No, it doesn't. But it gives you the space and resources to do the work of fixing yourself, if you choose to use it that way. They sat together as the sun moved across the sky, and Marcus tried to feel something other than numb. He'd won. He was a wealthy man now. But the nightmares would still come. The PTSD wouldn't disappear. The years of loss couldn't be erased. And Sophia, his daughter, who he hadn't seen in 3 years, couldn't be bought back with any amount of money. But maybe, just maybe, he could build something worthy of the second chance he'd been given. Something that honored not just Vincent Castellano's hidden fortune, but the veterans who'd stood beside Marcus when he had nothing. Something that proved broken things, broken towers, broken men could still have purpose and value. He stood up slowly. I need to call Sophia, or try to. I don't even know if Catherine will let me talk to her. David stood beside him. Only one way to find out. Marcus pulled out his phone, stared at it for a long moment, and dialed a number he hadn't called in 3 years. As it rang, he thought about bell towers and hidden fortunes, and the strange ways life offers redemption to those who refuse to give up. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice answered. Hello, Catherine. Marcus's heart clenched. Hi, he managed. It's Marcus. I know I don't have the right to call, but I was wondering if I could talk to Sophia, just for a minute. I have some things I need to tell her. Silence on the other end. Long enough that Marcus thought she might hang up. Then, hold on. More silence. Footsteps. A distant voice calling. Sophia. Phone for you. And then, after 3 years of silence, Marcus heard his daughter's voice. Hello. Hello. His eyes filled with tears. Hi, sweetheart. It's Dad. Hi, sweetheart. It's Dad. The silence that followed those words stretched so long Marcus thought the connection had dropped. Then he heard breathing quick, shallow, the sound of someone trying to control their emotions. Dad. Sophia's voice was different than he remembered. Deeper, older, cautious. Is it really you? Yeah, baby. It's really me. Marcus's voice broke. I know it's been a long time. I know I have no right to just call like this. But he stopped, overwhelmed. I've missed you so much. Another pause. Then, I saw you on the news. Mom, too. You found treasure in a tower. I did. But that's not why I'm calling. I'm calling because Marcus took a shaky breath. Because I've spent 3 years being too ashamed to reach out. Too broken to think I deserve to be your dad. But I'm trying to get better, Sophia. I'm really trying. And I was hoping maybe we could talk. Just talk, if you want to. I wrote you letters, Sophia said quietly. Like, a lot of letters. To the shelter address Grandma helped me find. Did you get them? Marcus's chest felt like it was caving in. No, sweetheart. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I thought you didn't want to hear from me. I thought you didn't want to hear from me. Her voice was thick with tears now. Mom said you were sick, that you needed space to get better. But I kept thinking if I wrote enough, maybe you'd write back. I'm sorry, Marcus whispered. I'm so sorry, Sophia. I should have been braver. I should have tried. They talked for 45 minutes. Sophia told him about school. She was in 10th grade now, on the debate team, thinking about colleges, even though that was still 2 years away. She told him about her friends, about the books she was reading, about how she'd started volunteering at an animal shelter. Marcus listened to every word, like it was oxygen. Learning about the daughter who'd grown up while he was gone. When Catherine finally said Sophia needed to go do homework, Marcus asked, "Can I call again? Tomorrow, maybe?" "Yes," Sophia said, immediately. "Please. I'd like that." "Me too, baby. I love you. I love you too, Dad." After they hung up, Marcus sat on that park bench and cried, not from despair this time, but from something that felt almost like healing. The treasure's full valuation came back 3 weeks later. David's team had brought in specialists, art historians, numismatists, bond experts, financial analysts. They'd catalogued everything, researched provenance, consulted with auction houses and investment banks. The final number was staggering: $310 million. The bearer bonds alone, once their validity was confirmed and adjusted for decades of compounded interest, were worth $283 million. The gold coins and bullion came to $19 million at current market prices. The artwork, once authenticated as including works by Frederick Remington, Charles Russell, and several other significant American artists from the early 20th century, was valued at $8 million. After taxes, legal fees, and trust establishment costs, David explained in his office, you're looking at roughly $187 million in liquid assets. That's yours, Marcus. Free and clear. Marcus stared at the number on the page. It still didn't feel real. What do people do with that kind of money? Whatever they want. Buy houses, travel the world, retire comfortably, invest for passive income, donate to charity. David leaned back in his chair. The real question is, what do you want to do? Marcus thought about that for a long time. He thought about the shelter where he still slept most nights, even though he could now afford any hotel in the city. He thought about Tommy and Ron and Betty and all the other people who'd helped him survive when he had nothing. He thought about the veterans in the courthouse gallery who'd stood beside him when powerful men tried to take everything away. I want to build something, Marcus said finally. Over the next month, working with David, Elena, and a team of consultants, the Marcus Webb Foundation for Veteran Services would be established with an initial endowment of $120 million, structured to provide services in perpetuity. The foundation would offer comprehensive support for homeless and at-risk veterans, transitional housing with no time limits, medical and mental health services, job training and placement assistance, legal aid, family reunification, counseling, and educational opportunities. It would be staffed primarily by veterans who understood what their clients were going through because they'd been through it themselves. Most programs for homeless veterans treat the symptoms, but not the causes. Marcus explained to the Foundation's board, which included David, Elena, 2 former generals, and 3 veterans who'd successfully transitioned from homelessness to stability. They give you a bed for 90 days or 6 months, then push you back out. But healing from trauma takes longer than that. Building a life takes longer than that. This foundation will be different. We'll stick with people as long as they need us. The first facility would be in Phoenix, a renovated downtown building that had once been a hotel. 50 housing units, a medical clinic, counseling rooms, classrooms for job training, a commercial kitchen teaching culinary skills, and a community center. Tommy would be the facility's first maintenance director. Ron, from the shelter, would help run operations. Betty would oversee intake and case management. But Marcus's most important decision involved the bell tower itself. He could have sold it, demolished it, or simply abandoned it again. Instead, he chose to restore it. "It saved me," he told Elena when they visited the site together, standing on the shore looking at the tower rising from the water. That tower was broken and forgotten, just like me. But it was still standing. Still solid. "I want to honor that," Elena smiled. "What did you have in mind?" "A memorial. A museum about the resort's history, about Vincent Castellano, about the veterans who've served and struggled, and a community center, a place where people can come for programs, support groups, art therapy." The tower stood empty for 95 years. It should be filled with life again. The restoration took 6 months. Engineers stabilized the foundation and waterproofed the lower levels. Craftsmen repaired the stonework and restored the windows. The interior was carefully renovated to preserve its historical character, while making it accessible and functional. The hidden chamber where Marcus had found the first cash became a small museum displaying replicas of the bonds and coins, along with photographs and documents about the resort's history. The flooded vault below was drained, cleaned, and converted into a small theater, where visitors could watch a documentary about the discovery and about homelessness among veterans, about PTSD, about the fight to keep what Marcus had found. And the bell, that massive bronze bell that had hung silent for decades, was restored and rehung. An electric mechanism was installed so it could ring again, its voice carrying across the lake to announce that something forgotten had been remembered, that something broken had been made whole. Through all of this, Marcus reconnected with Sophia. They talked on the phone every day at first, then every few days, gradually rebuilding trust. Catherine remained cautious, but allowed supervised visits. The first time Marcus saw Sophia in person. At a coffee shop, Catherine chose public, neutral ground. He barely recognized his daughter. She was 15 now, nearly as tall as he remembered Catherine being. She had his dark eyes, but Catherine's delicate features. She wore glasses he'd never seen before, and a band t-shirt for a group he'd never heard of. She was beautiful and growing, and nearly an adult, and he'd missed almost all of it. "Hi," Marcus said, his voice catching. "Hi, Dad." Sophia's voice was steady, but her eyes were shining. They sat across from each other while Catherine watched from a nearby table. For a moment, neither knew what to say. Then Sophia pulled something from her backpack, a worn envelope, corners bent, covered in stickers. "This is one of the letters," she said, sliding it across. "I saved them all. 37 letters over 3 years. Marcus opened it with shaking hands. The handwriting was rounder than he expected. More childish this must have been from early on. "Dear Dad," it began. "I miss you. Mom says you're getting better, but it takes time. I hope you're okay. I'm in 7th grade now, and I joined the debate team. We talk about important things like should school start later and should the voting age be lowered. I think you would like hearing the arguments. Love, Sophia." He read it twice, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there. You're here now," Sophia said quietly. "That's what matters." They talked for an hour. Marcus told her about Afghanistan, not the nightmare parts, but the parts about service, duty, brotherhood. He told her about the PTSD, explaining it in terms she could understand. His brain got rewired by trauma, and sometimes it thought he was still in danger even when he was safe. He told her about the shelter, about losing everything, about learning to survive on the streets. "Why didn't you ask for help?" Sophia asked. "I did. But the help that was available wasn't enough. And after a while, I stopped believing I deserved help. I started thinking, maybe everyone was better off without me." He met her eyes. "But I was wrong. I know that now. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure other veterans don't fall through the cracks the way I did." Sophia reached across the table and took his hand. Her grip was strong, certain. "I'm proud of you, Dad. Not because you found treasure, but because you're using it to help people." Marcus couldn't speak. He just held his daughter's hand and let himself feel hope. Over the following months, Catherine softened. She saw that Marcus was genuinely committed to recovery, attending therapy twice weekly, taking his medications religiously, building a stable life. The visits with Sophia became more frequent, less supervised. By summer, Sophia was spending weekends with Marcus at the small apartment he'd rented. Nothing fancy. Just a 2-bedroom place where Sophia could have her own room when she visited. "You could afford a mansion," she pointed out during one visit, looking around the modest space. "I could," Marcus agreed. "But I don't need a mansion. I need a home. There's a difference." The foundation opened its doors in September, 11 months after Marcus first bought the bell tower. The grand opening was emotional and overwhelming. Over 200 people attended: veterans, politicians, donors, reporters, and community members. The mayor gave a speech praising Marcus's generosity. A 3-star general talked about the importance of supporting those who served. But the moment that mattered most came when Tommy stepped to the microphone. He wore a suit for the occasion, the first time Marcus had seen him in anything but work clothes or shelter sweats. "My name's Tommy Rodriguez," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I served 2 tours in Iraq. I came home in 2008, and by 2010, I was living on the streets. For 7 years, I bounced between shelters, fought addiction, tried to hold on to my sanity. I thought I was done. Thought my best days were behind me." He paused, looking at Marcus in the front row. "Then, I met this guy, Marcus Webb. He was in worse shape than me. At least I had a truck to sleep in sometimes. Marcus had a backpack and a pair of boots held together with duct tape. But he never gave up. He kept showing up, kept trying. And when he caught his break, when he found that treasure everyone's heard about, he didn't disappear to some beach somewhere. He came back. For us." Tommy's voice broke. "This foundation isn't just a building. It's proof that we matter, that our service meant something, that we're worth saving. So thank you, Marcus, for not forgetting where you came from, and for building something that's going to save lives." The applause was thunderous. Marcus stood, hugged Tommy, and looked around at the facility, at the clean, dignified housing units, at the medical clinic already treating its first patients, at the classrooms where veterans were learning new skills. This was what the treasure had been meant for, not making one man rich, but giving hundreds of men and women a second chance. In the Foundation's first 6 months, it housed 87 veterans. 63 received medical treatment they'd been unable to access before. 41 completed job training programs. 27 were placed in permanent employment. 15 reunited with estranged family members. Each success story mattered. But one, in particular, stayed with Marcus. A woman named Sarah, Army Reserve, served in Afghanistan as a medic, came home with PTSD and survivor's guilt after losing 3 soldiers she'd tried to save. She'd been homeless for 4 years when she came to the Foundation, thin and hollow-eyed, and barely speaking. The staff worked with her patiently. Therapy, medication adjustment, safe housing with no pressure, job training in the medical field she'd loved but couldn't return to. Slowly, carefully, Sarah began to heal. 6 months after arriving, she stopped by Marcus's office. He kept a small workspace at the Foundation, going there 3 days a week. She knocked hesitantly on his open door. "Mr. Webb, do you have a minute? It's just Marcus. And I always have time. Come in." Sarah sat, clutching a folder. "I wanted to tell you I got a job. At Phoenix General. In the ER. Not as a nurse yet, but as a medical assistant. It's a start." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Sarah, that's incredible. It's because of this place. Because of you." Her eyes filled with tears. "I thought I was done. I thought there was no coming back from where I'd fallen. But you proved that's not true. You fell further than me, and you came back. So I figured if you could do it, maybe I could too." After she left, Marcus sat at his desk for a long time, staring out the window. This was the real treasure. Not the gold or bonds or paintings, those were just metal and paper and canvas. The real treasure was Sarah getting a job, Tommy having a home, Ron and Betty doing work that mattered, veterans who'd been invisible becoming visible again. The bell tower's dedication ceremony was scheduled for November 11th, Veterans Day. Exactly 1 year after Marcus had first swum across the lake to explore the property he'd bought for $1,200. The restoration was complete. The tower stood proud and beautiful, its limestone cleaned and repointed, its windows filled with historically accurate glass, its bell housing gleaming with fresh copper. A new bridge, sturdier, but designed to match the original's aesthetic, connected it to shore. Solar panels, disguised as roof tiles, powered the interior. The grounds had been landscaped with native plants and walking paths. The day of the dedication was perfect, clear sky, comfortable temperature. The lake reflecting everything like a mirror. Hundreds of people gathered on the shore. Veterans from the Foundation, supporters, donors, local officials, reporters, and curious citizens who'd followed Marcus's story. Sophia stood with Catherine in the front row. Marcus had asked them both to come, hoping Catherine would see what he'd built, hoping Sophia would understand why this mattered so much. Tommy stood nearby with other Foundation residents, wearing their Foundation t-shirts with pride. Elena had helped curate the museum exhibits and would give tours after the ceremony. Marcus stood on a small platform near the bridge, looking at all the faces looking back at him. A year ago, these people wouldn't have seen him. He would have been invisible, just another homeless veteran, another broken soldier, another casualty of a war that never really ended. Now they saw him. But more importantly, he saw himself differently. David introduced him. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to present the man who made all of this possible, not just through his discovery, but through his vision of what that discovery could become. Marcus Webb." Marcus stepped to the microphone. His hands shook slightly, but his voice was steady. "Thank you all for coming. Before I say anything else, I want to thank the people who stood beside me when I had nothing: Tommy, Ron, Betty, and all my brothers and sisters from the shelter. You reminded me I wasn't alone. That I mattered. That saved my life more than any treasure ever could." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When I bought this tower a year ago, I was homeless. I'd lost my family, my home, my sense of purpose. I was surviving, but I wasn't living. I bought this place because I saw something everyone else missed, not treasure. Though I found that too. I saw possibility. I saw that something abandoned and broken could still have value." Marcus looked at the tower behind him. "I learned something from this building. Treasure isn't about what you find, it's about what you build. Vincent Castellano built this tower 99 years ago. He hid his fortune here, and it sat waiting for nearly a century. But that fortune was just money. It wasn't doing anything. It wasn't helping anyone. It was just sitting in the dark." He turned back to the crowd. "Today, this tower isn't dark anymore. It's filled with light and history and purpose. It's a memorial to everyone who's ever felt forgotten. It's a reminder that broken things can be restored. It's a symbol that no matter how far you fall, you can find your way back." His voice grew stronger. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a veteran who got lucky. But luck isn't enough. You have to decide what to do with it. I decided to build something that outlasts me. The foundation. This tower. A legacy that says we take care of our own. That says service matters. That says no veteran should ever have to sleep on the street, or feel invisible, or think they don't deserve help." Marcus looked directly at Sophia, who was crying quietly. "My daughter wrote me 37 letters while I was homeless. I never got them because I was too ashamed to maintain contact with my family. I missed 3 years of her life because I thought she'd be better off without me. I was wrong, and I'm grateful every day that she gave me another chance." He swallowed hard. "That's what this tower represents: second chances. For me, for the veterans who come to the foundation, for everyone who's ever felt like they don't matter anymore. This bell," he gestured to the tower, "was silent for 95 years. Today, we're going to ring it again. And when you hear it, I hope you'll remember that silence isn't permanent, that broken things can find their voice again, that it's never too late to build something that matters." Marcus nodded to Elena, who pressed a button. The bell began to toll, deep, resonant, powerful. The sound rolled across the water and echoed off the mountains, filling the valley with its voice. Some people in the crowd wiped their eyes. Veterans stood a little straighter, and Marcus felt something settle inside him that had been restless and searching for years. The bell rang 12 times, once for each month since he'd bought the tower. When the final tone faded into silence, the crowd erupted in applause. But Marcus barely heard it. He was watching Sophia, who was smiling at him with tears streaming down her face. She mouthed 3 words. "I'm so proud." That was the moment Marcus knew he'd truly come home. After the ceremony, people toured the tower. Elena guided groups through the museum, explaining the resort's history, showing the replicas of what Marcus had found, telling the story of Vincent Castellano and the fortune that waited 95 years to be discovered. In the small theater below, visitors watched the documentary about Marcus's journey from Afghanistan to homelessness to discovery to this moment. Some emerged crying. Some emerged inspired. All emerged understanding that the real story wasn't about treasure. It was about resilience, redemption, and the refusal to give up. Marcus spent the afternoon talking with veterans, shaking hands, listening to stories. A young Marine told him about his own struggles with PTSD. An Army widow thanked him for honoring her husband's memory. An older Vietnam veteran clasped his hand and said, "You did good, son. You did real good." As evening fell and the crowds thinned, Marcus found himself standing alone on the bridge, looking at the tower silhouetted against the sunset. Sophia appeared beside him, slipping her hand into his. "It's beautiful, Dad." "Yeah, it is. I read all the plaques inside, about the veterans the Foundation has helped, about their stories." She leaned against him. "You're changing people's lives. I'm trying to." "No," Sophia said firmly. "You are. That woman, Sarah, I met her today. She told me she was ready to give up before she found the Foundation. She said you saved her life." Marcus thought about that. About Sarah and Tommy and all the others. About the paths not taken. He could have kept the treasure secret, sold pieces slowly, lived comfortably without ever telling anyone. He could have disappeared to some beach somewhere, left all this behind. But he'd chosen differently. He'd chosen to build. "Your mom told me something interesting today," Sophia said quietly. "She said she forgives you, that she can see you're different now. That maybe—" She paused. "Maybe we could be a family again. Not like before, but something new." Marcus's breath caught. "What do you think about that?" Sophia was quiet for a moment. "I think families are like towers. Sometimes they fall apart. Sometimes they stay broken for a long time. But if the foundation is strong enough, you can rebuild them. Different than before, but still solid. Still home." Marcus pulled his daughter close, and they stood together on the bridge as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The tower behind them was lit now with soft interior lighting, glowing like a beacon. From inside, he could hear laughter. Veterans attending an evening support group, finding community in a place that had once been silent and forgotten. This was what the treasure had bought. Not luxury or ease, but purpose. Not comfort, but meaning. The money had given Marcus resources, but the tower had given him something more important. It had shown him that being broken wasn't permanent, that falling wasn't final, that with enough determination and the right support, anything could be restored. The bell chimed the hour, 8 gentle tones rolling across the water. Marcus listened until the last echo faded, then turned to his daughter. "Ready to go home?" Sophia smiled. "Yeah, Dad, I'm ready." They walked back across the bridge together, father and daughter reunited. Neither of them broken anymore, but both forever, marked by the journey it had taken to find each other again. Behind them, the bell tower stood watch over the lake. No longer abandoned, no longer forgotten, no longer silent. It stood as testament to a simple truth: that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't found in vaults or hidden chambers. They're built, one decision at a time, by people who refuse to let their brokenness define them. People who choose to transform their pain into purpose, their trauma into triumph, their loneliness into legacy. Marcus Webb had bought a bell tower for $1,200 and found $300 million inside. But the real fortune, the one that actually mattered, was what he'd built from those ruins. A foundation that would help thousands of veterans. A memorial that honored the forgotten. A family that had found its way back together. And a life that finally, after years of darkness, felt like it was worth living. As Marcus and Sophia drove away from the lake that evening, the tower's bell chimed one more time, not mechanically programmed, but ringing freely in the wind. The sound carried across the water and through the mountains, a voice crying out to anyone who needed to hear it. You are not forgotten. You are not beyond repair. You are not alone. And somewhere in Phoenix, in the foundation Marcus had built, a homeless veteran heard that sound and decided to walk through the doors asking for help. Another life on the edge of collapse, reaching for hope. Another person who would be given the second chance Marcus had received. Another story of redemption waiting to be written. The bell rang on into the night, keeping watch, keeping faith, keeping the promise that broken things, towers, lives, hearts, could still be made whole. Anyone can find treasure if they're brave enough to look in forgotten places. But the real wealth comes from what you build with it, whether you hoard it in darkness or share it in light. Marcus Webb chose light. And in that choice, he discovered that the greatest fortune isn't what you find buried beneath stone and water, but what you build in its place. Lives restored, families reunited, and hope that rings out like a bell across still water, clear and true and endless. The end. Up next, two more powerful stories that will move you, tales of ordinary people who discovered that extraordinary courage lives in the most unexpected places. Click now to keep discovering remarkable journeys of hope, resilience, and redemption. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that everyone deserves a second chance, that broken things can be made whole, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones we build ourselves. Because these stories remind us that it's never too late to find your way home, and that the most valuable thing you can find isn't gold or fortune, it's purpose. Thank you for joining us on Marcus's journey. See you in the next story.